Well, welcome back to MGSTV. I'm your host, Andrew Scott, and we've got with us now Mr. Bob Stocker, Chair of the Gaming Practice Group of Dickinson PLLC. Welcome to MGSTV, Bob.
Thank you, Andrew. Pleasure being here.
Well, it's fantastic to have you. Well, here we are at the Macau Gaming Show. What do you think?
Great show. Real strong participation with the manufacturers who are involved in Asian gaming, and that's extremely important. And also the conference material over the last couple of days has been absolutely excellent, including your presentation.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Bob, you're the founder and past president of the International Masters of Gaming Law, and you've got a string of eminent titles and achievements relating to gaming law. Obviously, in the last 10 years, we've seen enormous growth in the amount of casino gaming going on in the world. A sizable proportion of that growth has been driven by Macau, a market which has grown from US $4 billion in 2003 to more than US $40 billion in 2013. From a gaming law point of view, what are the key implications for casino companies of this global shift towards Macau?
Oh, the implications are huge, particularly for US operators, because in the US operators, they're regulated not by the federal government, but by individual states, the states where they in fact are doing business. And the same is true for the gaming equipment manufacturers, that they're regulated by every jurisdiction where they're putting their equipment. And so now that we're into Asia, and with Macau having this phenomenal growth, but also in going into the Asian market, not just Macau but elsewhere, it's a whole different game over here in terms of the regulatory environment, the way the government works, etc. And these operators, whether they be a supplier or a casino operator, they have to comply with the local law here and at the same time comply with the local law in every other jurisdiction they're regulated in. And if they run afoul in any jurisdiction of the local laws, then that can have a domino impact on their licensure and their operations in every other jurisdiction that they're actually doing a business in. And that compels these companies to truly have a global perspective, but at the same time truly understand what the local environment is in each country that they're engaged in business in.
So with this internationalization of the industry, please give us an example of when a regulator might go to another jurisdiction to make an investigation.
Well, first of all, what we're seeing is in the U.S. is that the regulators go to the other jurisdictions and meet with the regulators in that jurisdiction. So if any issue is raised, for example, if an issue is raised in Macau that's in the press, in the media, and some kind of a controversy like fights between shareholders of an organization that raises an issue, or issues relating to relationships that exist between locals and the management of the operator, then what happens is the regulator, they don't just pick up the phone and make a phone call. They hop on a plane and they come over and they meet with the regulatory authorities and other authorities in the jurisdiction where an issue has arisen. So that, by way of example, Dubai is a minority shareholder in one of the big casino operators, owns more than 5% of the shares. And so they had to, Dubai as a government entity had to be interviewed by and reviewed by the Michigan authorities, amongst other authorities. So the Michigan regulators were over here initially for 2 weeks in Dubai, not here, but in Dubai, interviewing all the key Dubai people. Raises all sorts of issues when you're going into a country that has a completely cultural differentiation from the culture in the U.S. And then they go back every 3 or 4 or 5 years and engage in the same conversation again. So it's no more stay at home. We're a regulator in Michigan or in Nevada and we're staying home. It's we're getting on a plane and we're going to whatever country it is, and we're going to do our own investigation and make our own conclusions regarding whatever the issue is.
Bob, that's an amazing possibility. A regulator visiting a foreign sovereign nation to investigate them as a shareholder. I mean, that's got real potential for political implications.
Oh, absolutely. There are all sorts of problems here in terms of confidentiality, the ability to asking for release of criminal information in a country where, I'm sorry, we cannot release that information, and then a regulator saying, I want to see it, and another country saying, we can't disclose it, and then trying to find a compromise between the two government positions that does not have an adverse impact upon the licensee. And it is forced, particularly the American regulators, it's forced the American regulators to take into account cultural differences and find solutions that do not interfere with the ability of its licensees to engage in a lawful business.
Well, Bob, online gaming has risen exponentially in recent years, but it can really be a legal quagmire. I mean, a player in country A may place a bet with an operator who's based in country B, while the website servers are located in country C. Do we need a completely different legal approach for online transactions? And if so, how could that possibly come about?
Well, I don't think it's so much as a different legal approach, but what we have to start with a very practical issue. Politicians, and I refer to politicians as the political class. The political class does not understand the gambling business, period. They don't understand it. They don't understand the land-based gambling business, and so the internet gambling business is even more confusing to them. And when you don't know what you're talking about, you tend to adopt legislation that completely misses the point. And that's a huge challenge because once legislation is adopted, then the regulators have to follow the law. And if the law is poorly drafted, then the regulators find themselves in a quagmire in terms of how to deal with internet gaming. Now, having said that, internet gaming is a fact of life. What I have said to my students and teaching gaming law and teaching my business planning classes, I've said that what the internet has done is destroyed country barriers. Now, the countries don't like that, the politicians don't like it, but it has eliminated those barriers. And so the big challenge is okay, regardless of whether or not we legalize it, it's out there. So how do we get in the ball game? How do we regulate it in a fashion where the customers, whatever the business, whether it be gambling or buying shoes, the customers want to do it through a legal website rather than an illegal website. And that's the huge challenge for governments and for regulators. Plus, they can't react just based upon what the technology is today, because these 21-year-old geniuses are already developing a new technology that they're going to implement next year, and that's why you have to keep buying a new cell phone every 2 years. And so it is a huge, challenging issue that government is not really keyed to address appropriately.
A lot of people have talked about the impact of social media and social gaming on the industry. And it seems that from a legal point of view, social gaming may be even more complex than traditional online gaming, which itself is difficult enough, as you pointed out. Now, what's your view of how online social gaming might eventually come to be treated by regulators?
Well, clearly the social gaming sites are building databases that they ultimately want to convert and sell to internet gambling companies as databases that the gambling companies can use, or take their social gaming site and convert it over to gambling. They're already thinking that. There's a big discussion going on now in terms of how much conversion from social gaming to for money, prize gambling, gaming, what the conversion rate will be. Nobody really knows. The figure that I keep hearing the most is 5% conversion rate, but frankly, nobody knows if that's going to be correct or not. At the end of the day, as far as a regulatory environment is concerned, What the regulators have to focus on is how do you preserve the integrity of the game? How do you keep minors outside of the gambling network? And how do you build in protections to identify problem compulsive gamblers and move them out of the network? Those are the big three as a practical matter. Now, the reality is that there is technology out there, and it keeps being developed and becoming more and more sophisticated, that can accomplish those goals in terms of identifying who the gamblers are, where they are, whether or not it's the right gambler, whether or not there's any robotic play going on, whether or not compulsive activity is occurring. There are programs that have been developed and continue to be improved that can address all of that. But what that means is that the statutory framework and the regulatory framework has to be flexible so that the regulators can exercise judgment rather than trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
The subject of responsible gambling and the protection of compulsive gamers can be a real hotbed issue. Regulators and governments like to be seen to be doing something about it, but they often end up tinkering at the edges and are creating rules that don't work and have unintended consequences. In your experience, what type of responsible gambling initiatives do work well for the operator, but also provide genuine protection for compulsive players?
You know, problem gaming is the unloved, unwanted stepchild of gambling. That's the best way I can put it. What I have said, and my position is this, is that this is an issue that the industry needs to take the leadership on, as opposed to the regulators or the political class. The political class doesn't understand it all, so they're the worst ones to try to implement. They put caps on betting, or they say the most number of chips you can buy is 200 chips, $200 of chips, and then you can't buy any more, and then they shut the door for the gaming facility, but you run out of the chips, and so the compulsive gambler goes to someone else and says, I'll give you $2 for every $1 chip you have, so they can keep gambling. Those things don't work. What has to be done is a meeting between the industry, between academics, and in particular, I want to point out that there is, once every 3 years, the University of Nevada, now at Las Vegas, conducts a gambling and risk-taking conference where they bring academics in from all over the world who present papers on the studies they've done with problem gambling and what works and what doesn't work. And there needs to be more dialogue between the industry, the regulators, the political class, and these academics than is what is going on right now. And I've been encouraging that with the leaders of that particular conference, and they are working on that. Now, what works? To a certain extent, self-exclusion works. It's limited in its impact in the U.S. because of constitutional rights. In other jurisdictions throughout the world where you don't have to worry about due process so much, if the wife or another family member has the authority to go in and say, my husband or my spouse is a problem gambler, I want that person to be barred from the facilities. In those jurisdictions where a family member can ask for that, and then that kind of an implementation can be put into place, then that's a tremendous that kind of exclusion is a tremendous vehicle. The other things that are being tried now that are moderately effective with slot machines are programs on the slot machine that tell you how long you've been playing the machine, how much you've lost, how much you bet, not just how much you've lost, but how much you bet through the time period. And so giving you a better sense of what's really going on. And that data also can detect aberrant compulsive behavior, which the casino can then, if it wants to, address and go over and perhaps tell that person they're done gaming for the day.
In recent years, there's been an increase in cases where players have brought some kind of action against operators for inducing them to gamble in some kind of unfair manner, or so they may claim. Claiming that the actions of the operators have been unconscionable, that kind of thing. But by and large, these actions have not been successful, indicating that courts around the world seem to stick with the notion of individual responsibility. What are your thoughts on these kinds of legal actions?
I agree with you that in the United States in particular, these actions have not been successful. There was an action in Canada where it never went to trial, but rather the province folded and settled, and that has been very, very controversial in terms of folding and settling. I have to point out that in part it varies. The exposure on this will vary as a matter of law, what kind of laws and regulations individual countries or jurisdictions have adopted. It also depends on the strength of the court system and the role of the court system. In the U.S., the regulatory environment is really run through the regulators as opposed to the court system. And it's a common law system. You go to Europe or Asia, in Europe you have civil law in most countries, not in everyone, obviously it's common law in England. But in civil law, the roles of courts are dramatically different in civil law countries, and then you have jurisdictions in Asia that are a blend of their own system that isn't common law or civil law, but kind of a blend of whatever they've created. So part of this also relates to how much authority is given to the courts or the regulators in terms of awarding a player damages as opposed to just going to the operator and saying, we don't like how you're handling your operation and we're going to fine you.
So Bob, as gaming grows throughout the world, is gaming-related crime growing? What are the most prevalent crimes and how harshly are they being punished?
Well, the more gambling games that are available, the more you're going to have crime. This is a people event, and if you have 10,000 people involved in an event, you're going to have a certain percentage of criminal activity. If you have 1 million people, you're going to have a greater number in terms of raw numbers of criminal activity. So yes, on a pure raw number basis, it will increase. On a percentage based upon per capita, the answer is no. It's pretty stable. But in terms of raw numbers, yes, it's higher. And in fact, that's one of the statistics the anti-gambling industry keeps using. Oh, crime's going to go up. Percentage-wise, it actually goes down in those jurisdictions where you are employing more people, so you have fewer people that are robbing people. But within the casino, you're always going to have an element that is going to try to scam the system. And I don't care how much eye in the sky or anything else you have, you're going to have activity where some customers, a small percentage, are going to try to scam the system and steal. And so the industry always has to be on guard, and on guard for all the new technology. You have Asian gangs that in Asia they're going to come in, particularly when a casino is first opened, and you've got all these new trainees. You have gangs that come in and try to scam the system. Now, actually one of the ways the industry is dealing with this, for example in card games, is now instead of just having a live dealer and relying upon the live dealer and calling in blackjack the winners and the losers, the cards are being read as they're being dealt, so that the casino knows what's being dealt and knows what's winning, knows what's losing. And instead of the dealer dealing the cards, a machine is dealing the cards. So that kind of a technology is being implemented to keep a handle on the customer illegal activity. Now, you have an entirely different set of activities out here, and that is in the manufacturer end. You may have someone that's trying to, that puts a false code in the software so they can take advantage of the system. So the manufacturers, particularly the slot machine manufacturers, in developing their software technology, the software is looked at very, very carefully by both the manufacturer and also the testing lab, whether it be one of the international testing labs like GLI or a state or government testing lab. That software is tested there too to try to detect whether or not there are any bugs in the system that could enable you know, a real smart software person to go into the casino and take advantage of that bug. So we've got that kind of activity has to be thought about too. And then finally, you have the issue of in new jurisdictions and awarding casino licenses. Are the casino licenses being awarded in an honest fashion, or are there under the table payments that, for example, with the U.S. operator would violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act? And so that's another level that you have to think about in terms of illegal activity. And the only way it's increased is by virtue of the fact that we have a lot more jurisdictions that are involved now. And so each time a new jurisdiction comes on, there's a startup period where you have to be concerned about certain types of criminal activity that then kind of calms down after the startup period. And then you get the more traditional activity, which really most of the time the focus is the operator watching what's going on in the actual casino.
Well, thanks very much, Rob. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Yep.
And we'll see you next time on MGSTV.